The Speedway station on Route 119 in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, sat halfway between Uniontown and Connellsville in the stretch of road where the coal towns used to be. Leith, Leckrone, Merrittstown, towns that had names and post offices and company stores, and that now had foundations and memories and the kind of grass that grows through the cracks of things that used to be important. The station had 10 pumps, a convenience store with an ATM that charged $4 per transaction, and a slushy machine with 2 flavors, blue and red, both tasting identically of sugar and regret, and a parking lot that was too big for the station because the lot had been poured when the coal was running, and the traffic justified 10 pumps, and now the coal was gone, and the traffic was halved, but the concrete remained, because concrete doesn't care about economics. Ford Tack Keenan pulled into the Speedway at 4:45 on a Wednesday afternoon in early November, because the Speedway was on his route home from the job site, and stopping was habit, and habit was the structure that held his days together, the way rebar holds concrete together. Invisible, internal, essential. He was 43 years old, 6'2", 265 pounds, and he'd been a structural ironworker for 22 years, the kind of man who walks steel beams 400 feet in the air and connects them with bolts and welds, and the absolute certainty that the beam he's standing on was placed by someone who did their job correctly. He ran Keenan Structural out of Uniontown, a 5-man crew that did structural steel erection, steel stair fabrication, and miscellaneous metals for commercial construction across Fayette, Westmoreland, and Greene counties. His beard was reddish-brown with silver running through it, thick, reaching his chest, with a small structural bolt, a 3/4-inch A325 high-strength bolt, the kind that holds steel connections together, threaded through a hole in a leather cord and hanging from the right braid. His forearms were sleeved in ink. His left arm carried a steel structure under construction, rendered in photorealistic detail, columns and beams, and cross-bracing rising from a foundation, with a crane boom visible at the top and a connector riding the ball in silhouette against the sky. His right arm was a connection sleeve, a bolted moment connection in cross-section showing the beam, the column, the shear tab, the bolts, and the welds, with a torque wrench and a spud wrench crossed underneath. His knuckles were tattooed in block letters, iron on the left, work on the right, because ironwork is the trade, and iron is the material, and the work is what holds everything above the ground in place. He wore a black leather vest with the column MC center patch, a steel column rising from a bolt circle with a connector standing on top in silhouette, his enforcer diamond, and a small ironworker's pin shaped like a spud wrench on his breast pocket. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels and hit that notification bell, because this story starts with a girl pressing an emergency button at a gas pump, and the reason she pressed it 9 times and walked away 9 times is the reason she's alive. The column MC had been founded in 2012 by Ford and 5 other ironworkers in Fayette County, men who climbed steel for a living and rode steel on the weekends. The club had grown to 17 members across Fayette, Westmoreland, and Greene counties, all of them men who built with steel, ironworkers, welders, fabricators, the men who erect the skeleton of every building and every bridge and every structure that supports weight. The club's philosophy was structural. Every connection has a critical path. Miss one bolt and the connection fails. Miss one connection and the structure fails. The thing you skip is the thing that falls. Ford was inside the store buying a coffee and a pack of beef jerky when Rena, the cashier, said, "That girl's doing it again." "Doing what?" "The button. Pump 3. She walks up, hits the emergency stop, walks away. She's done it 4 times since I came on at 3. Every time the pump shuts down, I have to reset it from in here." The guy at pump 3 came in yelling about it the second time. Ford looked through the window. Pump 3 was on the middle island, second from the left. There was no car at Pump 3. There was a girl. She was maybe 11 years old. She was standing at the end of the pump island, 15 feet from Pump 3, facing the road. She was wearing a denim jacket over a yellow shirt, jeans, boots that were too big for her. The kind of boots that belonged to someone else and that she wore because they were available. And available was the standard, not size. She was standing still. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. She was watching the road. As Ford watched, she turned. She walked to Pump 3. She reached for the emergency stop button, the red button on the side of the pump housing, the one labeled Emergency Stop in white letters, the one that kills the pump instantly. She pressed it. The pump clicked off. She turned and walked back to the end of the island. "That's 5, Rena said. "If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Asphalt Angels." Because a girl was pressing an emergency button at a gas pump and walking away, and the reason she was doing it is the most important thing nobody was asking. Ford walked outside. He didn't go to the girl. He went to his bike, parked at Pump 8, the far end, and he leaned against it and he watched. The ironworker's brain was running load calculations. A girl pressing an emergency stop button, repeatedly, not vandalizing, pressing and walking away, not hiding, standing in the open, not running, staying at the pump island. The behavior was a loop. Walk to pump, press button, walk away. Walk to pump, press button, walk away. The loop was deliberate. The loop was a pattern, and patterns in structural work mean stress. A connection under cyclic loading will repeat the same motion until it fails, and the repetition is the warning. The girl walked to Pump 3 again. She pressed the button. Click. The pump died. She walked back. 6. Ford pushed off his bike. He walked to the middle island. He stopped 20 feet from the girl, close enough to talk, far enough to not approach. He sat down on the pump island curb the way he'd learned to sit on steel beams, steady, balanced, showing that he wasn't going anywhere. "That button shuts down the pump." The girl didn't look at him. She looked at the road. "I know." "The cashier's getting frustrated." "I know." "Why do you keep pressing it?" "Because it's the only emergency button I can find." If you're watching this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes 1 second, and helps these stories reach the people who need them. Now, back to the story. Ford sat on the curb. The sentence landed in his chest the way a bolt lands in a hole. Perfectly, completely, the exact fit for the space that was waiting for it. Because it's the only emergency button I can find. She wasn't pressing the pump button because she wanted to shut down Pump 3. She was pressing an emergency button because she had an emergency, and this was the only emergency button available to her, and pressing it was the only way she knew to tell the world that something was wrong. "What's the emergency?" The girl looked at him for the first time. She looked at his vest, his patches, his tattoos, his size. The same evaluation that every child in every Asphalt Angel story performs. The database of safe and not safe. The pattern recognition that happens in the space between a glance and a decision. "My name is Hailey. I live in the brown house on Leckrone Road. My mom's boyfriend, Seth, has been hurting my mom. He broke her phone last week, so she can't call anyone. He took the car keys. He unplugged the internet. He told her if she left, he'd kill the cat, and then he'd find us. She can't call 911 because there's no phone. She can't drive because there's no keys. She can't email because there's no internet. I walked here from the house. It's 2 miles. I walked here because the gas station has a phone and it has an emergency button, and I didn't know which one to use, so I pressed the button because it says emergency, and that's what this is. She said it the way children say things that are too large for their mouths, in one long exhale, the way you blow air through a pipe to clear a blockage, all at once, because if you stop, you might not start again. The words came out in a single stream, and then she was empty, and she stood at the end of the pump island and looked at the road, and her hands were in her pockets, and she had said everything she had, and the everything was enough. Ford stood up. "Did you try the phone inside?" "I don't have money. The payphone needs money." "Did you tell the cashier?" "I told her my mom needs help. She said to call 911. I said I don't have a phone, and she said there's a payphone outside. I said I don't have money, and she said she couldn't help. So I pressed the button. Because the button doesn't need money. The button doesn't need a phone. The button is there, and it says emergency, and you press it, and something happens. The pump stops. Something changes. I pressed it, and the pump stopped, and I thought, that's what emergency means. You press something, and things stop. And if I pressed it enough times, maybe someone would come outside and ask why, and I could tell them why. How many times have you pressed it? I lost count. A lot. I walk up, and I press it, and I walk away, and I wait, and nobody comes out. The lady inside just turns it back on. So I press it again. I've been here since 3 o'clock. An hour and 45 minutes. She'd been pressing the emergency button at pump 3 for an hour and 45 minutes, walking to the pump, pressing the button, walking back to the end of the island, standing, watching the road, walking to the pump again. An hour and 45 minutes of the same loop, the same button, the same click, the same silence. A child had been standing at a gas station for almost 2 hours, broadcasting a distress signal on the only frequency she had access to, and the only person who'd responded was a cashier who reset the pump from behind the counter without walking outside to ask why. Ford texted the column MC group chat. Speedway, Route 119 between Uniontown and Connellsville. Girl at pump 3. Pressing the emergency button because it's the only emergency button she can find. Mom trapped at home. Boyfriend broke phone, took keys, cut internet, threatening to kill the cat. Kid walked 2 miles. Been pressing the button for almost 2 hours. Need brothers now. GPS pin. Beam responded first. Vice President, connector. 5 minutes. Then rivet from Connellsville. Then bolt and weld together from Uniontown. Then splice from Brownsville. 5 riders. Ford walked inside. He told Rena, "That girl isn't messing with the pump. She's pressing the emergency button because she has an emergency. Her mother is locked in a house with a man who broke her phone and took her keys, and she walked 2 miles to the only building she could find with a button that says emergency on it. Call 911. Rena's face changed. The annoyance drained and was replaced by the expression of a person who has just realized that they missed something important, that the thing they interpreted as a nuisance was a signal, and the signal had been repeating for 2 hours, and she'd been resetting the pump instead of reading the message. She called 911 at 4:58 p.m. She described the situation: an 11-year-old girl reporting domestic violence, mother trapped, phone destroyed, keys confiscated, internet disconnected. The Fayette County Sheriff dispatched 2 units. If Asphalt Angels has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below. Now, back to the ending. Ford went back outside. Hailey was at pump 3 again. Her hand was on the button. She hadn't pressed it. I called 911 for you. The cashier did. Help is coming. Hailey's hand dropped from the button. She looked at the button. The red circle, the white letters, emergency stop. She looked at it the way a person looks at something that has served its purpose. The button had done what it was supposed to do. not what it was designed to do. It was designed to stop a fuel pump in case of a fire or a spill. But what it was supposed to do, which was announce that something was wrong. She had pressed it 9 times. 9 times the pump had shut down. 9 times the cashier had reset it. 9 times the message had been sent and ignored and sent again. The 10th time, someone listened. The sheriff's deputies arrived at the Brown house on Leckrone Road at 5:15 p.m. 2 units. The house was a single-story ranch with brown vinyl siding that had been brown for so long it was turning gray, a gravel driveway, a front porch with a plastic chair and an ashtray full of cigarette butts, and a front door that was closed and locked. The deputy knocked. Seth Allen Marsh, 34, opened the door. He was calm. He was the particular kind of calm that men perform when their system is in place and functioning, and they believe the system is invisible to everyone outside the house. The calm of a man who has total control over a small domain and is accustomed to the domain's borders holding. The deputy asked to come inside. Marsh hesitated. The hesitation was 2 seconds, long enough to be a decision, short enough to look like politeness. He opened the door. Jolene Weeks was in the bedroom. She was sitting on the bed. She was not watching television. She was not reading. She was not on a phone because there was no phone. She was sitting on the bed in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon in a house with no phone, no keys, no internet, and a man in the living room who controlled all 3. And she was sitting because sitting was the only activity available that didn't require permission or resources. The phone, a Samsung, Jolene's only phone, was in pieces in the kitchen trash. The deputy opened the trash, and there it was. A shattered screen, the battery separated from the body, the SIM card snapped in half. The phone hadn't been dropped. It had been destroyed, the destruction methodical. The SIM card snapped separately because a broken phone can be repaired, but a snapped SIM card means the number is gone, and the contacts are gone, and the connection to every person in Jolene's life who might have answered if she'd called is gone. The car keys were in Seth's jacket pocket. He produced them when asked. He said Jolene had lost them, and he'd found them, and was keeping them safe. Jolene, standing in the hallway now, shook her head. A single shake, small, the smallest possible motion of disagreement. The movement of a woman who has learned that disagreement must be measured in millimeters because anything larger triggers consequences. The Wi-Fi router was unplugged and locked in the trunk of Seth's car. The trunk key was on Seth's keyring. The router had been in the trunk for 9 days. The same 9 days Jolene had been in the house without a phone, without keys, without internet, without any method of contacting the outside world except a front door that she was afraid to open because Seth had told her what would happen if she did, and she believed him because the things he'd already done, the phone, the keys, the router, the bruises on her upper arms that she hid under long sleeves, were proof that the things he said he would do were not threats, but previews. Jolene had a bruise on her left cheekbone that she said was from a cabinet door. She had bruises on both forearms, defensive bruises, the kind that happen when you put your arms up to protect your face, the kind that form in the shape of a grip because hands leave grip-shaped bruises and cabinet doors don't. She had a cat in the bedroom, a gray tabby named Smoke, who was hiding under the bed because the cat had learned that loud voices meant hiding, and Seth's voice was always loud, and Smoke had been hiding under the bed more days than not for the last 3 months. Marsh was arrested on charges of domestic assault, coercive control, unlawful imprisonment, destruction of property, and intimidation. The phone fragments were photographed. The Wi-Fi router was recovered from the trunk. The car keys were returned to Jolene, placed in her hand by the deputy, and Jolene closed her fingers around them, and the grip was the grip of a person holding keys for the first time in 9 days, and understanding that keys mean doors, and doors mean leaving. and leaving is now possible. The front door was opened, and it stayed open, because open doors are the opposite of Seth Marsh, and the opposite of Seth Marsh was what this house needed. Hailey's aunt, Patricia Weeks, lived in Connellsville, 20 minutes north. She was called at 5:30 p.m. She arrived at the Speedway at 5:50. The canopy lights were on. The parking lot was half empty. Hailey was sitting on the Pump Island curb at Pump 3. The same curb, the same island, the same pump whose emergency button she had pressed 9 times in 2 hours because it was the only button in her world that said emergency, and she had an emergency, and nobody was listening until someone did. Patricia walked to the Pump Island. She looked at Hailey on the curb. She looked at the red button on Pump 3. She looked at the distance between the two. 15 feet. The distance a girl had walked 9 times in 2 hours. The distance between standing and pressing and walking away and waiting and pressing again. The repetition of a child who had one tool and used it until someone paid attention. She crouched in front of her niece and she said, "You press the button." 9 times. 9 times. Nobody listened the first 8. The 9th time a biker listened. He came outside and he sat on the curb and he asked me why. That's all. He asked why. Nobody else asked why. The lady inside just turned the pump back on. Every time. She turned it back on and I pressed it again, and she turned it back on and I pressed it again, and it went like that for almost 2 hours. And then the biker came out and he didn't turn the pump back on. He asked why. Patricia pulled Hailey into her arms and held her on the concrete of a gas station pump island at dusk in November, and Hailey pressed her face into her aunt's shoulder, and she did not cry because she had spent 2 hours pressing an emergency button and walking away, and the discipline required to do that 9 times, to be ignored 8 times and press it a 9th, had compressed the crying into something denser than tears, something structural, something that would come out later in a safe room in a safe house with a safe person, but not here, not on the concrete, not at Pump 3. Patricia held her and rocked her, and the rocking was the rhythm of someone who understood that a child who walks 2 miles and presses a button 9 times is a child whose courage has been measured in repetitions, and whose patience has been measured in resets, and whose pain has been measured in the silence between the click and the walking away. The column MC of Fayette County, Pennsylvania, now sponsors a program called Red Button. In partnership with gas stations and convenience stores across Fayette, Westmoreland, and Greene counties, they install a secondary emergency button inside every participating store, a red button behind the counter, identical to the pump buttons, labeled Emergency. But this one isn't connected to a fuel pump. It's connected to a direct line to 911 and the column MC phone tree. And next to every pump emergency button in the program's territory, there's a small sticker, a steel column silhouette, and the words, "This button works for all emergencies. Press it. We'll listen." Hailey Weeks is 12 now. She lives with Patricia in Connellsville, in a house with a phone that works, and keys on a hook by the door, and Wi-Fi that stays on, and a cat named Smoke who sleeps on the couch instead of under the bed, because the voices in this house are not loud and the hiding is over. Jolene is there too. She left the brown house on Leckrone Road the same week, walked out the front door that Seth had turned into a wall, and drove the car whose keys Seth had confiscated, and she drove north on Route 119 past the Speedway, where her daughter had pressed a button 9 times, and she hasn't been back to Leckrone Road since. The brown house is empty now. The ashtray on the porch is still full. Nobody has emptied it because nobody lives there, and the cigarette butts are the only things Seth left behind that nobody wants. Hailey still walks past gas stations. She still looks at the pumps, and sometimes she looks at the emergency button, the red circle, the white letters. and she thinks about the fact that she pressed it 9 times and walked away 9 times, and the 9th time was the one that mattered, and the reason it mattered was that the 9th time someone saw a girl pressing a button and asked why instead of resetting the pump. Ford still stops at the Speedway on Route 119. Rena still works the counter. The pump at number 3 still has a red emergency button on the side, and every time it clicks off unexpectedly, Rena doesn't reset it from behind the counter anymore. She doesn't reach for the switch on the console. She doesn't assume the pump malfunctioned. She walks outside. She walks to the pump. She looks at who's standing near it. She asks if they're okay, because the last time she reset it from inside, there was a girl pressing it who had walked 2 miles with an emergency, and the button was the only word she had, and Rena had turned that word off 8 times without reading it. Be the one who asks why. Thank you for watching this story. If it reminded you that an emergency button on a gas pump can mean something bigger than a spill, please share it. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels for more stories proving that sometimes a child will press the same button 9 times because the emergency doesn't stop just because you reset the pump. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if you saw someone pressing that button?